All right, so this is for 8 imaginary numbers. We first need to know what the I stands for that we're going to use, and then we're going to graph it, operations, quadratic formula. Okay, so I, you can write this anywhere on your page, the top of your page. I represents the square root of -1. You know, before when we said that we have a negative under the square root didn't work out, it wasn't a real answer. Well, it's not a real answer. It's an imaginary answer, so we use I to represent it. Okay. And that way we can just use this I in operations without having to write square root of -1 over and over again. So that's what it stands for. It's kind of a shortcut for us. Another thing that we need to know is what I squared is. I to the second power. Remember before, if you square a square root, those are inverse operations, so they'd cancel each other out. You all remember that when we were taking the square root of both sides? A square and a square root cancel each other out. So if I were to square this, I just get -1, what was left on the inside. So anytime that we see the square root of -1, we know that means I, and vice versa. And anytime we see I squared, we know we can represent that as -1. Okay, so those are two important things for you to know when we're talking about imaginary numbers. Also, we write all of our imaginary numbers in this form, A plus BI. That's the way that we write them. And I said this last time, but I'll just remind you, and you guys can help me out. Which is the real part, the A or the B?
The A.
The A, that's the real part. And the B or the BI, the part with the I, that is the imaginary part. Okay? All right, so on your complex plane, complex numbers are just ways to say a number that has an imaginary number with it. What we're used to seeing as the x-axis is the real axis. What we're used to seeing as the y is what's called the imaginary axis. So we look at the number they give us, we find the real part and the imaginary part and plot it accordingly. Okay, so I'm just going to do one of these since we really did this the other day. So 2 is the real number, right? And -3 is the imaginary. So when we're graphing, we go +2 in the real direction and -3 in the imaginary direction. So start at the origin, +2 in the real, and -3 in the imaginary, and put our point. So I've gone 2 real and then down 3 since it was negative for imaginary. Okay. All right, put your finger on your computer screen where the -1 plus 5i would be. So go -1 plus 5i. So we go negative in the real and 5 in the imaginary. All right, everybody see where that is? You touch that point on your computer, and let's make sure you're right. I went -1 in the real and 5 in the imaginary. Is that where you put your finger? Is that where you thought the point would be? Okay, then we're good. All right, we'll scroll some more. The next couple types of problems that you have, they give you the point and they want you to write down what the number is. So you write the real part and the imaginary part. So on the first one, our real part would be -1. The imaginary part would be 2, right? So -1 plus 2i. Thumbs up if that's good. Y'all okay? Which direction we go in? Okay. If you need clarification, let me know. I could talk through it again. All right. So that's graphing them. We just know real, imaginary. Okay. When we are simplifying or doing operations, we do everything like we're used to doing, like I is just a variable. So we just think about I being like an X or an A or something like that. The only thing that happens is if we have an I squared, we want to replace it with -1 because that's what I squared is. So here we go. We did a few of these the other day. I'm just going to go down the list of odds. I'm not going to do the evens just because I want to make sure that y'all have time to work today. Okay. So I'll just work my way down here. So on number 5, I'm just combining like terms. We have 6 minus 3i minus I. What are our real parts that we have there? 6, okay. Negative 3i and negative 1i makes negative 4i. So when you have a string of numbers like that, there's no multiplying or anything fancy. You would just combine like terms, okay? And on all of the problems like this, if you found your I button, which is second decimal point, you could type that in exactly like that. It's going to give you the answer. You don't have to work it out yourself. All right. On number 7, what do we need to do with this negative in the middle? It needs to be distributed, right? Anytime you have a minus in between parentheses, that's the only thing that I could see y'all getting tripped up on that problem is make sure you distribute. So negative 5 plus 8i, and that'll be plus 5 plus 2i. Okay, now we combine like terms. What's a negative 5 and a positive 5 make?
Can you explain what you just did again?
Oh, I just distributed this negative, so I had to multiply negative 1 times 5, and that made a positive 5. And a negative times a negative here makes a positive 2i. It's like there's a negative 1 in the front that you have to distribute to both. Anytime you have a negative in front of parentheses, it's like a 1 right there. That gets multiplied times both of those. So negative 1 times negative 5 is positive 5. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. I'm just rewriting it so that I don't have the parentheses anymore and that negative is not in the middle. So negative 5 and positive 5, what does that make when you add them together? 0. So I don't have any real parts left. What is 8 and 2? 10. Good. So our answer would be 10i. And remember, you can work these out yourself and then double check them in the calculator, or just do them in the calculator first initially. I don't care. I said we were just going to do the odds, but there's not one like number 8 that's an odd, so I want to make sure that you see that. So if I say 5i times this, I'm going to distribute my 5i. So this is 5i times negative 1 plus 7i. I'm going to write that down. Okay. So 5i times negative 1 is just negative 5i. And 5i times 7i is 35i squared. Right? If you have I times I, it makes I squared. Okay. And we're almost done on this problem. We don't ever leave anything higher than the first power of I because we know what I squared is. What is I squared the same as? So if you look at the top, we put it in a box. I squared is the same as?
Negative 1.
Negative 1. So we're going to replace I squared with negative 1. We don't leave it in our answer. Okay. So this will be negative 5i plus 35 times negative 1. And 35 times negative 1 just makes a negative 35. So we don't leave I squared in our answer. If you see an I squared, we replace it with negative 1. We'll jump down to 11. So go ahead and write the one with the 5 and the 4 in it. So 5 plus 4i and negative 6 minus 7i. Okay. Remember, when we have two sets of parentheses multiplied, we start with our first term and distribute it first. So we're going to do that one first, and we'll write it down, and then we'll do the second one. So 5 times negative 6 is negative 30. 5 times negative 7i is negative 35i.
How come we didn't do that on number? How come we didn't do that on number 5?
Because it wasn't multiplied.
Number 7.
That wasn't multiplied, it was subtracted. That minus sign in between was like, take this and subtract it from this one. Okay. Then when they're touching together, that means to multiply them. Okay?
All right.
All right, so we did the 5. Now we'll do the 4i. Oops, I wanted the thin marker. So 4i times negative 6 is negative 24i. 4i times negative 7 is negative 28i squared. So my first one times both, my second one times both. Are there any like terms we can combine that have the same variable in power? The ones that are in the middle, right? We can combine those together, okay? And we also see an I squared, and what does that I squared need to become? A negative 1, okay. So negative 30, minus, what's 35 and 24 is 59. Minus 28 times negative 1. Remember, I squared becomes negative 1. So this is negative 30 minus 59i plus 28, right? Because that negative times a negative makes a positive 28. Are there two terms we can combine now? The 30 and the 28. Negative 30 and 28, and that makes negative 2. Okay, what I want you to do right now is I want you to, in your calculator, whichever calculator you have that's got an I on it, whether it's a school one or Calculate 84, I want you to type that problem in exactly how it's written, and we'll see if we all get negative 2 minus 59i. So I want to make sure that you can do that to double check your work, or just do it in the calculator in the first place. Remember, the I button, if you're on a school calculator, is second decimal point. All right, who typed it in and got negative 2 minus 59i? Good, good. Okay, just know that you can do that on your problems, on your tests and homework. You don't have to work all these steps out, okay? You can just see the problem and type it in. Anybody need help using the I button, or it didn't work for you? Yes, Daviana. Are you on a school Chromebook? Yes. Okay, you've got the calculator up, right? Okay, yes. So you're going to type in 5 plus 4, and then you use the I button, which you hit the second, which is the blue.
Where's the I button?
It's over the decimal point.
Oh, okay. I see.
Okay, so second decimal point, you'll get it that way. So you just type it in, and you'll get your answer. Okay. All right. The next we're going to do with the dividing problems, we're just going to just type those into the calculator. We're not going to go through all the steps. They take a while to do. We can do them later on in the year if you want to go through how to do them step by step, but I'll just show you this just in case you see them on the ACT. So we're going to type this in the calculator, but they don't like you using the fraction bar, I'm pretty sure. So you're going to have to use a divide by sign, okay? So this is how you would do it. 6 minus 9i divided by -7 minus 7i. So put parentheses around the top and put parentheses around the bottom, and let's type it in and see what we get. So once you get that crazy decimal, did everybody get like a crazy weird decimal with an I at the end when you type that in? Hit math, enter, and it'll make it a fraction for you. So math, enter. So math is underneath alpha. So we hit math, enter. Did we get a fraction now on our screen? I got 3 over 14 plus 15 over 14i. Raise your hand if you also got that on your calculator screen. Okay. Anybody else? So like 4 of you guys. Some of you are still writing it down or plugging it in. Make sure that you can do this because you're going to have to know how to do it for your test. I don't think it lets you do it when it's a fraction. I'll try it real quick. When you do like the fraction bar, that's how y'all normally do fractions, right? You don't do parentheses and divide. Yeah, no, it doesn't let you do that. So you have to do parentheses around the top divided by parentheses around the bottom. Okay, go ahead and try number 13 real quick and let's see if we all got the same answer. But go ahead and do number 13, top in parentheses divided by the bottom in parentheses. Yep.
So I got a fraction.
57 over 113 minus 64 over 113i. Was that it?
It's like 0.5 and
Make sure, did you put parentheses around the entire top and bottom when you put it in? 8 minus I divided by 8 plus 7i. And then hit, oh, that's a 0.5. That's a decimal. Now change that to a fraction. Hit the math button, which is underneath alpha. And then hit enter, and then enter again, and it'll change it into a fraction for you. Okay.
Okay. So 57 over 113.
Yep. Minus 64 over 113i.
Yeah.
So we type it in with parentheses, and it'll give us a crazy decimal, and then we change it to a fraction. Math, enter. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go across the line, make sure everybody got it. Shakira, Donovan, Layla, and Jackson, did you get it? Hand up if you did. If you got it in your calculator, you typed it in correctly. Shakira, good. Okay. Mackenzie, Javion. Is it April or April?
It's April.
Okay, second guess. Did you get it in your calculator?
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Jayla got hers. Amaya, Shalia, Devin, Amari, did y'all get it? Okay. Devin, you did? Good. Muedzi, Carlos, Charles, Jeremiah. Thumbs up if you got it in your calculator. If it works, you're getting the right answer. Okay. Aiden, Alex, Jaden, Diamond. Good. Okay. Anna, Canantriel, Gavin. I almost said Sarah. That's me. Y'all got it? Good. I got it too. Daviana, Taylin, Paris, Trinity. Does it work in your calculator? Alex said no. Alex, did you type it in the school Chromebook calculator with the parentheses? Then you got a crazy decimal. Then you have to hit math, enter, enter. All right. Hopefully that works. If you still can't get it, Alex, I'll help you when we all start working on your homework. Okay. All right. The very last thing for this section is using I when you're solving problems with the quadratic formula. That means that if you get a negative under your square root, the only thing you have to do is you just put an I in front of the square root sign. So we take the negative out, we put an I in the front. So if you end up with a negative under your square root, when you do the quadratic formula, you just have an I in your answer. It goes in the beginning. Okay. So that's the only thing that's different from normal quadratic formula problems. And I'll show you how we do that. All right. So we're just going to work one, and that'll be fine for us for this. So we'll use the regular quadratic formula. If a negative is under a square root, we have an I in our answer. Because negative under the square root means we have an I. So A equals 11. B is -1. C is 3. Just a reminder of our quadratic formula. Okay. -1 makes a +1. Plus or minus the square root of -1 squared minus 4 times 11 times 3 all over 2 times 11. And once you get to this point in your quadratic formula, you evaluate the stuff under the square root. Has anyone evaluated that in your calculator yet? Were you waiting for me to do it? Some of y'all are like, yeah, I'm waiting for you. Which it's a -131. So 1 plus or minus the square root of -131 over 22. If you have a negative under the square root, is your answer going to be real? No, this is not a real answer. These are going to be imaginary answers. So how many times are they going to actually touch the x-axis if you graph them? No times. These will not touch the x-axis because they're not real answers. Don't touch the x-axis. This is a negative discriminant. We have no real answers, but we do have 2 imaginary ones. Okay, so this is how we write it. If there's a negative in the square root, we don't like to leave it. Instead, we pop an I out in the front. 1 plus or minus I root 131 over 22. because I is the square root of -1. If we have I in the front, we know that there was a negative in there to begin with. So the only thing different when you're quadratic formula problems, if you have a negative, what do we put in the front of the square root sign? An I, and that's it. Okay. Those you can't do in the calculator, but everything else in this section, other than graphs, you're welcome to do that. Okay. So this one does not touch the x-axis because it has a negative discriminant.